This first piece is about the ex-governor of Texas, Rick Perry, because I hate his guts. And I was trying to think about, what if I didn't hate his guts? How would that look? And so I wrote this story. Let's call it Chord. Rick Perry is on an elevator in the State House building in Austin, and he has to fart, but he's not alone, and he knows it will be audible and wet-sounding, and of course he's also governor. This is about a week or so after I drowned to death over at the Barton Spring pool. Maybe you saw it in the local paper, though it wasn't that big of a story. It went like this. Some college kids on mushrooms break into the closed park at night to go for a swim. One of them isn't as strong of a swimmer as she thinks. Drowning in real life isn't nearly the production people think it is. In fact, it's almost easy to drown, the easiest thing a body will ever do. It was a mental cut and paste job for the guy typing it up for the city section of the paper. Hey, presto. Rick Perry is thinking about whether or not he can get away with letting out a little controlled fart, and I'm dead by drowning. He doesn't know the people in the elevator, but they all know him. It's the first day of a new Senate session. My boyfriend of a month is sitting on his couch and trying deliberately to feel a little worse than he actually does about my death, and the fact that he intends to use it as mental and emotional leverage to drop out of school, probably for good. My twin sister is at work repeatedly writing and then deleting an email to the guy who delivers coffee and other refreshments to her company break room every week. They're dropping him as the supplier in favor of employees bringing in their own coffee, and she doesn't have the heart to tell him. My mother is smoking a cigarette in the backyard of my childhood home, looking back in through the kitchen window absently. I'm sort of everywhere at once, although it's occurred to me that maybe that isn't true, that maybe I'm still in the moment of slipping under the water, and my subconscious brain is trying to save me from the knowledge that death is an endless nothing. I try not to dwell on it, but it's hard. I found that it helps to focus on some kind of banal and emotion-free detail going on in the world, like Rick Perry's tightly pursed anus, that physical discomfort deeply rooted in the having of a body. A thing I wouldn't possibly feel good about imagining to distract myself from my own death, and therefore mustn't have. It must be really happening out there in the world. It must be that I'm connected to everyone in my death. Rick Perry doesn't remember me. At least, I'm not in his thoughts in any real or conscious way, but I remember him. He was speaking at a fundraising event, and I was there for extra credit in my high school government class. Our teacher wanted us to go out and get invested in politics, but like a lot of Austin kids, I already was. I knew Rick Perry as a man who wanted to control my body, who thought his slick shit paternal authority was all that was necessary or valid in government. So I listened to him talk. I got in line to shake his hand, and then when my turn came, I looked up at him with what I thought were my best big baby deer eyes, and I spat in his face. I was composing the moment, trying to be memorable, evocative. What I couldn't expect was the look of hurt, the loss of composure. I thought about it a lot while I did my community service, and then for a little while after, and then I tried not to think about it anymore. When I think of that moment now, mostly I'm sad about trying to be remembered. It was a thing I did a lot when I was alive. I was obsessed with being memorable, like I would act almost as though I were composing the present in order for it to be a beautiful past. My smile would be brilliant but not warm. I would be there but also in the place beyond there. My boyfriend, that one on the couch, he said to me right before I went swimming, "You look at the world as though it's already ended." We were sitting on the hill leading down to the Barton Springs pool, and it had just started raining a little bit. It smelled of petrichor, which is the word for when it smells like it just started raining a little bit. And I was in the moment of being high on mushrooms when you're feeling at once that you wish it would never end and are also terrified that it might not. And I knew that word right then, petrichor, though I also knew that I had never heard it before. And I said to him, "Hasn't it?" What Rick Perry doesn't realize as he tries with an increasing amount of concentration to make it through this elevator ride without letting rip is that though, yes, his life in this moment is about him, it's also about me and about the other people on the elevator and my sister and my ex-boyfriend, and that his struggle to not fart on the elevator is a basic admission that he wants to understand and love the people around him, and that, though he would say, if pressed, that mostly this kind of thing is just not done in an elevator, meaning it's a breach of decorum, which is one of those things he loves when it suits him. What he is asking for from the people around him by holding back is the kind of unrequited and universal love that he can only provide for himself. What I did was I stood up and stripped off my clothes, conscious of what I must look like, but not really self-conscious that none of my friends had seen me naked before that moment. I walked haltingly down the hill, avoiding roots and slick mud, and I leapt in. The water was cool, not cold, and I stayed under. There was just enough light to see the rough surface pelted by rain, and I thought to myself that I could go deeper, that I could get to another burdenless place, and all I would have to do was exhale. So I did. It seemed at the time like the only thing in the world to do. Rick Perry steps off of the elevator and into an empty hallway and finally lets himself release a long, plaintive fart. It's the best he's felt all day. He smiles a little at the stupidity of his life. For a brief second, he's nearly a contemplative man. He's nearly a person I could like. I wish I hadn't spit in his face, is what I'm saying. I wish I'd had the power to show him something more. I wish I'd had the power to tell him that he is compassionate in small ways, that he wouldn't fart in that elevator, which is a place to start, that he's trapped inside of himself, and so is everyone else, and that his being right is no more or less being right than anyone else's being right, that there's very little between me and him and everyone else except the meat and bone that contains us, even if it isn't true. Even if what I'm seeing in him now is just me seeing it in myself, as my lungs burn and my body screams out for oxygen and my brain flips that little switch, the one that's been there all along, the one that's marked, let her think she knows everything, abolish the concept of time. This is the last moment, one last burst of purpose. Give it to her, just give it to her. Make everything finally all right. Thank you. That piece is actually in a book called Lesser American Boys that is supposed to be out right now. But if you know anything about independent publishing, you know that things are never out when they're supposed to be out. So it'll be about sometime in 2017. Date pending. This piece is from the short story collection I just finished, which doesn't have a home yet. And this is called Guardianship. Two angels are fist-fighting in my backyard. I watch them through the window, sipping at a gin and grapefruit juice I just made. They, the angels, are naked and smooth and grappling and kidney-punching each other like they really mean harm. Feathers are pulled free. An arm is brutally locked up and bent wrong. They aren't bleeding, but light is pouring out of them in places. I don't know what they're doing there, or why they're so ferocious, nearly feral, or why they chose my yard, or if I'm supposed to intervene, so I watch. One of them rears back and headbutts the other, and the other one goes down on the grass. I hear the smack from indoors. The headbutted one gets back up, flapping his wings like a startled chicken. Dwayne comes out from his room, rumpled but alert. He sees the bottle on the counter. You're not supposed to drink that when I'm here, he says, too smart for 6 years old, my boy. You're supposed to be asleep, I say, so we're both in trouble. I glance from him to the window and back again. One angel grabs the other around the waist and lifts him off his feet, bringing him down hard on the earth. Come here, I say, still watching the window. Dwayne walks over to me. I bend down and start messing with his hair. Look at this, all kinds of wrong. You look like a goddamn dweeb. He squirms. He winces. He's happy, but a part of him isn't. The part of him I never seem to get at in the right way. I want to show you something, I say. I hoist him up, and I show him what's going on in the yard. What are they fighting over, he asks. I can tell he's afraid, that little boy fear that comes on so easily when he just wakes up, when the world is still here and kept on spinning without him knowing. So I think on a reason. They're fighting over us, I say. Why, he asks. Well, one of them is going to watch over you, and one will watch over me, and they both want to watch over you, so they're fighting to see who gets to look after who. The one has the other pinned and is ripping away at his flesh. Dwayne turns away and presses his face into my shoulder. He's never set foot in a church, never read any of the stories. This is his first glimpse of the ugliness in the whole enterprise. The angel on top stops. The one below him is still, one wing ripped free, the neck turned wrong, light pouring from its mouth and the wounds at its side. The one above has a hand pressed into the face of the one below, and he pulls it away and falls back, shoulders heaving. Soon he will turn and look at us. Soon the next thing will happen, and there's no stopping it. The boy smells of sleep, sweat, and fear. His nails dig into me. It's love, I say. It's just love. Thank you. Next, I'm going to take a risk. I feel good about those. I don't feel good about this. This is from a novel I'm writing, and the novel right now is called Crimes of Language. And it's about a guy who gets in a really bad car wreck and suffers a traumatic brain injury, and it changes him in ways he's not comfortable with. And he starts experiencing all these intense new emotions and intense synesthesia, and he starts getting upset about the way language is definitive, meaning not just it's something that, you know, tells us what the world is, but it's also something that, like, makes the world so. And so he gets a job at a dictionary office, and he starts stealing language. And that's kind of the plot of the novel, is he starts stealing more and more words. But this stuff's from right at the beginning. And I'm reading it tonight so that it's real, and I have to keep working on it, because otherwise I would just go back to writing my dumb little stories. And then they'd be like, well, why haven't you written a novel yet? And I'm like, shut up. Give me tenor, please. I know. That's the idea. Now I have to write it. I can't walk away. Anyway, so I'm going to read one short little chapter and one scene that I'm still working on. This first one is probably the second chapter. It's right after he gets the job. In the week before he began his job at the dictionary offices, Larry did a good job of feeling normal. He meticulously cleaned his apartment, including things like the baseboards and the top of the fridge. He ate oatmeal. He went to the store for some high-quality Tupperware so he could bring his lunch from home. At the store, he allowed himself to buy a tie that looked just like a fish. It was eccentric, sure, but not too much. It didn't give anything away about him. He got an oil change. He got his tires rotated. He sat in a lobby reading a People magazine or staring at his phone. He liked status updates. He liked tweets and filtered photos. He fell asleep one afternoon watching basketball. He considered briefly adopting a dog, one of his own, a good one that might wear a bandana. He did pull-ups in his door frame, his soft triangular body with its fish-flop legs. He came in from a light jog to see there was a cockroach crawling dimwit across the floor. He brought a shoe down on it, and when he pulled it away, there was a smear of blue on the laminate. Splayed out behind the crunched, papery body, blue. It made no sense at all. He didn't dwell. He got 3 paper towels and folded them over enough to pick up the cockroach without feeling it between the plies. He wiped the blue away. The bug and the blue went into the kitchen trash, then the trash was tied off and taken outside. Larry's nose was running from the cold. He was still winded from the run. He felt wobbly and small at dusk in the parking lot of his apartment complex. He made himself dinners. He did the dishes as he made them, kept a tidy sink. He yanked the sprayer and sprayed bits of food down the drain, loving the way it jumped back from the pressure of the water. He brushed teeth, he flossed, he gargled water, he spit, he masturbated over the toilet or not at all. He could definitely get a dog, a good-sized dog that had want of a hike. He watched Frasier reruns at night and laughed at the right times, felt all the mild emotions at the right times. He ignored the way his tongue burned in his mouth all afternoon. He sucked on cough drops. He ignored. He ignored and he asserted and he was feeling very normal. Please, thank you. The world was not a tablecloth to be ripped away, leaving behind clattered dishes in an off-center vase. There were other things he did. There were things he did not do. This is Larry, and Larry is gorgeous. A whole world shines out from him, a world that gets limbed away by sense-making categories, the dull horse plop of other people's perception of him, the same as everyone, the same as you. Fraser Crane went gog-eyed on the television screen and scrambled into the kitchen after Niles, and Larry made the same face, there in an apartment by himself in Durham, North Carolina. A little bit more. There was a Thomas Kincaid painting over the mantel at Larry's mother's house. In it, a cobblestone bridge that led to a cottage crossed a river, and everything was somehow both pastel and bright. Larry couldn't tell if it was fall or spring. The trees were gold, the flowers were in bloom. It was perpetually dusk, pink singing along on each brushstroke. The world of the painting so bright and in love with him. He didn't want to think about the accident, but it had a power. How good he'd felt before, like the inside of him was finally allowed a moment outside, and though he knew in some way that it was an artificial enlightenment brought on by all the drugs, he didn't care. He was loosed, careening, and then he wasn't, and then he was this person looking at a painting. He didn't want to think of himself as freed by the accident or as imprisoned by it. He did not want to think of the accident at all. He remembered being 16 and thinking this painting was embarrassing. His mother had bought it from the mall for what had been a small fortune for the two of them at the time. For years, Larry had thought that at least it had been an artist original, but even that turned out to be false. It was painted by a machine that recreated Kincaid's brushstrokes, and in this way both inauthentic and oddly still authentic. This had been to young Larry a profound and heart-sickening outrage. What had been so wrong with him then? Now he thought it was beautiful that that could happen, that a painting which had once been a rare sight was now readily available. Everything else, too. He could see the Mona Lisa in seconds if he wanted to. He could see the Grand Canyon and a Matisse if he wanted, and even some celebrities' breasts. All of these things no longer an object, but the idea of the object. The world was permeable and losing its concrete limits. Objecthood was an outmoded way of being, and people hadn't caught up. And then, here was Kincaid's painting, caught between idea, object. The painting was lovely. Just look at it. If you saw that place, you'd think you'd died, and you wouldn't even care. You'd make your way to the bridge and cross right on over. Artifact and artifice come from the same place, he thought. His mother walked in with a dog in her arms, the littlest one, Perry. Larry hated that dog, and he hated that their names rhymed, though Larry's mother still called him Lawrence. She said it like a plaint. Perry had braided hair and a sickly rat face. He shook all the time and shit the carpet as an act of protest and snapped at people, and was generally the kind of dog his mother had to apologize for because she didn't have the heart to euthanize. His mother loved Perry and the 4 other dogs, which weren't allowed out at the same time, and she loved him with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Larry did his best to ignore any parallels between himself and the dogs. "Dinner's in 10 minutes, his mother said. "Okay," Larry said, turning back to the Kincaid. He took a sip of fizzy water. His mother stroked Perry's back. "I'm just so proud of you," she said, "getting that job. You're doing so well." Larry tilted his head back and put his drink away the way he used to do with Miller High Life. It lit up his throat like winter light, like a gum commercial. He turned to face his mother, whose eyes were wet with pride, and it seemed so silly. He was a normal human being who now had a normal human job. But then he remembered that his mother was also proud of Perry for peeing on the pee pad instead of the hall carpet. "What's for dinner?" Larry asked. "That pork roast you like," she said, "the one with the peach habanero and asparagus." Larry tried his best not to frown. Since the accident, meat tasted like corporations to him. Other foods had taken on new flavors too, but most were pleasant. Tomato sauce was being buried to the neck in sand. Milk tasted like his friend Sophia from high school. Ice cream tasted like the time they'd gotten drunk and she'd put her mouth on him down there. Eating nothing at all tasted like pennies or like the diodes of a battery pressed to his tongue, which he'd grown used to, almost comforted by. "These are all parts of who he is now, and that's okay," was what his therapist said. Damage may not be the healthiest word for it, but that's what it was. Evidence of the damage all around him, in his mouth and on his mother's face, in his new appreciation for Kincaid, in the prickle of his scalp, and the way if he looked at his toes, they would begin to look like they didn't belong to him. At times it made him feel afraid, and other times he felt freer than he'd ever been. He would be this for the rest of his life. Dinner was quiet, with the occasional barking fit from the bedroom where the dogs watched television from their crates. He and his mother were both unused to each other, though he lived with her for a month before getting into his own place. There was a carefulness to their conversation. He'd been in Dayton, Ohio for near a decade, doing fine for himself. Perhaps he'd been directionless. Perhaps he'd not loved people properly, or he'd taken his romantic relationships not too seriously. Perhaps he had a problem with drinking and the casual use of drugs. There was no point in dwelling on those things now. Here were the new things. Was he still her baby boy, as he'd been when he packed up and left? Was he that Dayton person who had called in frequently? Was he someone entirely new? How fast were his cells dying and being replaced? At what point can what currently exists be reasonably said to not be what existed before? And if you've been replaced by something else, Larry, would you know it? Would it be something to fear or accept or thrash against? Would it, doing so break you open like the small and bespeckled egg of a quail? They talked about the weather. If this was more snow than normal, the way snowmelt plonked outside his window, which dog took thyroid pills and which dog took antidepressants. They talked about the new job. Larry tried to talk to her about talking, about how it was like a tunnel that formed between a speaker and a listener, and how the tunnel was too small, like a drinking straw between oceans, and how the pressure, if not carefully regulated, might find a way to destroy a person's brain entire, the same way a shotgun might take apart a melon heavy with juice. But then he saw that she was crying for some reason. So he fell silent and forked some asparagus into his mouth, then more asparagus, then pork, then some little part of himself, then asparagus. Thanks. I shouldn't have. I got to go back and make that not asparagus because I can't say that word 4 times in a row. Should I do one more or should I quit? One more? All right, shut up. This one's called Interrogation. What? It was a car wreck, if anybody's asking. This is called Interrogation, and it's about a little boy who eats rocks, and I named the boy Donald for obvious reasons. What? I will tell you that it started with him eating rocks. The boy, Donald, we couldn't stop him, and Lord, I tried. His mother tried too. Mostly I believe that. He had read something about birds doing it in a book he got for Christmas, and so he started too. I would find him in the yard with a fistful of pebbles, taking them with a glass of water like you might take aspirin. I slapped them out of his hand, and he bawled toward the sky. That was the first time. I think if I'd acted different, he wouldn't have started doing it in secret. I still might have changed the course of events. I tried so much. I tried reasoning with him. I tried the belt. I tried keeping him indoors. Nothing stopped him. I'd find little piles hidden away. He got handfuls of aquarium gravel, crumbling bits of brick from the side of the house, a whole piece of chalk, which of course is just a rock of a kind. You must understand that there was no talking to the boy once he got something in his head. I put him in that closet for his good. I needed to think, to find a way through to him. It's a failure of imagination, I'll admit that, but it kept him safe. I kept him safe. I think of him in that closet, and it's like a womb, never mind the cobwebbed boxes and the old vacuum cleaner. I thought a room had the meaning you put on it, so if I would whisper to him through the bottom of the door that he would be okay, this is a special, safe place. I know he believed it. He didn't have to respond for me to know. I mean, say you were the interrogant. Say our roles were reversed, and you were sitting in this room, featureless save the ways it has yellowed at the corners, and you were the one being asked about the boy, and you were unfamiliar with the room like I am, so it had a kind of power over you that was told to you by the manner and meaning of the interrogator, that power being a destabilization of self. And say also you knew that this was the purpose of the room, interrogation. Say you knew why you were the one being asked about the boy, that you felt guilty, though, of what you did not know, and so you had to wonder if that also was a quality of the room, that perhaps situation and self are one and the same. Say our roles were reversed, and in our reversed roles, you wanted to ask me a question, therefore reversing our reversed roles. And say I allowed you to ask that question, what would it be? Would it be the same as mine? Because my question is this: wouldn't you start to believe you'd done it, whatever it was, since you're here, and here is its own inevitability? And wouldn't that then be the proof that the boy was saved in there back in his womb? Wouldn't he be weightless and free? I can see you're not moved, which perhaps proves my point. The boy had never been a talker. He was very nearly a mute. I believe he found language frightening in its livingness and its ability to shape truth. He liked to read, and he'd ask for dinner, but that was about all, at least around me and my place. I don't know who he was around his mother. It could have been a different boy entirely, though I don't like dwelling on it. Point is, when I put him in that closet, he went full quiet. The boy was just off, which was the idea. I needed to think about this thing with the rocks, and meanwhile I couldn't have him all belly full of them sneaking off to some corner to ingest. It scared me, I'll admit that. When I first told his mother about the rocks, she didn't believe, and that scared me too. It got me to thinking about that different boy that lived with her, and then I thought maybe she was lying, that she'd seen it too. There was never any controlling the woman, which meant there was no controlling the boy in her care, and I struggle with that. I mean, say you were a man who could only be sure of what was in your home, and that's every man, isn't it? And what would you do if the thing you loved with everything you had inside you spent more than half the time in a place that you couldn't be sure of? Meaning, does it even exist in the way you think it does? Meaning, what is not to say that once the boy leaves your sight, he is no longer even there, that he might fade out entirely, and a handful of little rocks would plink the ground where he was at the edge of your world, the space you controlled. I have to believe you'd try to stop it in whatever misguided way you could find. I have to believe you'd do it out of love, and I have to believe you'd keep the one you loved out of those blooming jaws of formless unknowing, that same unknowing that led the boy to put a rock on his tongue and think it might transubstantiate into something that would let him fly. I needed to think on the problem, and the more I thought on the problem, the bigger it got in my mind. The boy required a kind of protection I didn't know how to give. I thought enough time would allow me a chance at a solution, and I needed that time, so I went and made it for myself. I knew his mother would believe me when I said what I said to her, when I told a lie to keep her away and distracted. When she first left me, she said I was a rot on all living things, and the best thing anyone could do for the future of humanity was to keep away from me. I didn't argue, because I don't see a point to argument. The judge who awarded joint custody disagreed, which was a small mercy in an otherwise ugly time in my life. I'll admit her words ring out sometimes in my quietude, like when I'm wandering my property, looking for raccoons coming out of the tree line to fuck with my garbage, or when I'm hauling a load of scrap metal to sell for weight. My life isn't glamorous, and the boy's mother believed that I was cold, unloving, so when I told her the boy ran off, she took it for herself and did the rest of the lying for me. I know that likely caused trouble for you all, and for that I'm sorry. I was only being a good father. I did not do it maliciously, despite the things she said, the ones I know about and the ones I don't. I can only assume you've spoken with her, or will be speaking with her soon. Be sure to ask her, if you haven't already, about her own willingness to believe an untruth so fully, with a credulousness that seems to me the same as guilt. Because if you're a champion of truth, a susser out of the whole story like I am, an interrogator, which is what you are, as I understand it, she stands against you, whereas here I am compliant. I kept him in the closet to eliminate the meanwhile, like meanwhile, ... the boy, ... and I wasn't there to keep control on those ... In telling you all this, I am trying to say something profound about love and my behavior. I know you're a skeptic by profession. I know you perhaps think I am confessing to some lesser crime than I've committed, that this is some ploy to turn myself into a victim, and I'd ask you one more question. I'd ask why I'm not a victim. Why the world is so eager to move a man out of that category when he's alive like everyone and hurt like everyone and struggling like everyone and going to be one day be an object in the ground like everyone. It was a week he was in there, maybe more, 9 days. I fed him granola bars, pancakes, all those flat things he liked. I'd slide under the door, and I pressed my face to the floor and whispered through the crack that I'd find a way to make it better. He didn't answer, not once, but I felt his love and understanding, and a flashlight revealed the outline of his bottom and his feet, my little one safe and sound. I needed him to suspend his belief, just like I need you to suspend yours, to not let the room I'm in be the dictator of the real, just as my boy ultimately did. I want to find him. I believe you do too. I have to. I know now how perceptive my boy was. He knew that words are not enough to make a room what it is, that it requires something else, belief maybe, or just a certain arrangement of matter. Maybe some dance between conscious and context is required, and it's not just one or the other, and the boy figured that out when I couldn't, or maybe he just heard me in my ugliest muttering, and in that way he knew that he was not in a womb after all. It's a habit I find myself falling back on, talking to myself, saying awful things. I chew my nails to the quick too, till they're beyond bloody. Look at them, all crusted up with the jam of my dried blood. See me. How I feel about all this is written on my body, not guilt, but worry. Because see, after a week and a little bit of time, I had my answer. I had turned it over and over in my mind, and I knew it to be the truth. I knew how to make the boy stop eating rocks, how to make him stop believing he might be a bird, how to put him into a state that was both infinite and contained. I knew how to make him fixed, is what I'm saying. And though I don't quite know what I mean, at the time I did, and I girded myself for the act. I went to his womb, and I threw the door open to fix my child, to make things right. You know already he wasn't in there. So now I have to ask you how he did it. What kind of will does it take to defy what's real? How do you change context with consciousness? How could a boy misinterpret the world so badly and then end up being right? Because when I flung the door, he wasn't there at all. There was no sun, no womb, one thing only on the soiled carpet. No boy. Just a pile of rocks. Thanks.